to the council for discussion or a motion.
Motion to approve the comments. I said members were present, just as arrived at.
Oh, I'll take
No,
care
the
of
actual
that.
time.
I'll add that in.
Good catch.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And they stand approved. We will now have our introduction of new employees, and we'll begin with Chief Jacobs to introduce her new employees.
Good evening, council and mayor. I have to present to you today Rebecca Snyder. She comes to us with 6 years of experience from previous employment in North Carolina. And let's see, she's an outdoors person, which is what brought her to Utah. So we're very happy to have her and her experience here to join our team. So
Thank you. Welcome. Yeah, we already had a talk about their trees and our trees.
Yes.
North Carolina has a lot more than we do. All right, we'll now invite Mr. Pastrick up to introduce his new employee.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. This is Lou Garcia. She is our new Executive Administrative Assistant in Community Development. Lou, just a little bit about Lou. She lives in the city and she has experience working for Salt Lake City. One just fun thing about Lou is in her resume. So she took, after working for Salt Lake, she took some time to be a full-time mom, and I loved her resume description of mom. So I'm going to share. She said the title was household manager. Responsibilities included multitasking, crisis management, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. So I didn't do all that. So,
Nice
thank
to
you.
meet you guys.
You as well. Thank you. And we'll now invite Dan Johnson to come up and introduce his employee.
Good evening. This is Rain Jennis. She is in the street operations division as an operator. She has a CDL and she worked for Granite School District before this, and she's been running a sweeper for us. And the couple of little storms we actually had to push, she went out and plowed some snow, and we're glad to have her.
Well, welcome. Nice to meet you. You too. Thank you. All right, we'll now review the agendas for, do we have any changes on tonight's city council?
Mary, if I may, just with this time, I don't have Tumai
Oh,
on the
okay.
list, but
Oh, for a
because
new employee?
because he's not a new employee, everybody knows Tumai. But I wanted to see if I can bring him up during this segment,
Yes.
just to, you might coming up, our new chief code enforcement officer. Like I said, he's been here for a while, so he was in a not necessarily a new employee, but our first chief code enforcement officer for the city, and new position. Really happy to have him, and I think he's gonna do really great for the city. Tumai, if there's anything you'd like to
No,
say?
just excited to take on the new challenge and make the citizens happy, make everybody happy, and do a good job for you.
Hey, thank you.
In fact,
Welcome to your new role.
Yeah, in fact, I did roll along with him a couple hours ago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
All right.
I think Tumai's reached out to everybody already to see if
Yep.
anybody wants to go around right on. Thank you, Claire.
Yep, thank you. All right, we'll now review our regular city council agenda, special redevelopment agency agenda, and our special housing authority. Anybody have any questions on those? No? And no changes for tonight?
Just one question on the housing authority. How will that, maybe going forward? Will it just dissolve, or will we still need to have an housing authority?
So it will eventually dissolve. It's gonna be, we'll technically have the housing authority until January 1st. There'll just be nothing going on, or nobody in there. Transfer is gonna be July 1st. While our employees. But it will, it'll remain until about January 1st and then it'll dissolve.
The chair, I finally get some responsibility.
You haven't been the chair before?
I think I am.
Oh, okay. Okay, no questions there. We'll just have our regular meeting and then go into the two after. All right, our awards for next week are on March 11th. Mr. Johnson, do you want to come up and talk to that one? Looks like recognition of some employees.
Yeah, this one's fun to do. We've got 3 employees who were nominated and received awards from the Utah chapter of the American Public Works Association. And I'm also on the board of that organization. So it was my intention, if with the council's permission, to come and present those awards on behalf of the organization as well as the city. But Jeff Ray was recognized as the Outstanding Municipal Engineer of the Year, Justin Begay as the Outstanding Snow Removal Professional, and Steve Dale, whose work you see regularly on the consent agenda, is the Outstanding Land Surveying Professional for the state of Utah. So,
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
great, thank you.
All right, we'll go to our public hearings and we'll turn the time to Chief Jacobs regarding West Valley City Police Department acceptance of a judicial or justice assistance grant.
Good evening, Colleen Jacobs, Chief of Police, and I am before you today with a 2024 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, also known as the JAG grant. We accept this grant annually. It is from the Department of Justice, and it is a formula grant that they award us for this year in the amount of $88,914, which is actually lower than it has been in years past, but they did award it this year. And with those funds, we look to renew Gray Key license renewal, Cellbrite license renewal, purchase of ballistic vests and a low light camera kit system. The Gray Key, Cellbrite and low light camera kits are all investigative tools that we use. They're hardware systems that, well, the licenses are software, but they're hardware systems that are used for investigative techniques. And then ballistics vests are, of course, used to protect our officers. And those are the 4 items that are being asked of those funds. The logical question is, why am I bringing a 2024 grant to you in 2025? The feds had their time frame off a little bit this year. They didn't release the grant until September. They released the solicitation. The application was due in October. They sent it back to us as approved in December. When they send it back, they send it approved with conditions because we do have to have a 30-day review and a public hearing on this particular grant. And so it was sent to council in January, and here we are ready for approval in February. So that's kind of the timeline. Usually they release this grant in in May, but for some reason they didn't get it out until September. So while we still have federal funding available to us, we would like to accept this and get it spent.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the council? Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, we'll now go to our resolutions. Resolution 24-34. We'll turn the time over to Mr. Pastrick to execute the amendment to a development agreement.
Thank you, Mayor. This proposed development agreement amendment is fairly straightforward, and so I'll walk through these slides. So this first slide shows the property back in 2021 when this development agreement was first executed. So at the time the property was rezoned to manufacturing, there was a development agreement that included standards for the design of the buildings, the extension of Beagley Road through the property, and then some reimbursement language in that as well. So if you go forward to a more recent air photo, you can see that same property in blue, but you have now Beagley Road that extends through the property on the south end. And then you have this remnant parcel on that south end that's just south of the road. And so the proposal before you would basically amend the development agreement to exclude that very small parcel to the south of the road. So the main parcel with the building that you see now, the development agreement would remain intact. And it would, so essentially the only change to the agreement is removing that south parcel or the parcel south of the road from the agreement. So if we look at this next slide, you'll recall the council recently approved a zone change on the property in orange for industrial. And so that little sliver parcel will be acquired by the developer doing the project in orange. And so this essentially allows that to move forward so that the development agreement no longer applies on that smaller piece.
Okay, thank you. Makes sense. Does anybody have any questions?
Will the development agreement for the larger orange piece be applied to that, the new?
It will not, but in this case, though, that strip would not have any buildings on it, right? It's just basically like the canal and maybe some landscaping. So I feel like we're covered in the sense that our code pretty much already addresses that.
Okay. Do they have sidewalk out there or is it just landscaping?
There's actually already a 10-foot, so the development agreement requires that they put in the 10-foot walkway along, so that we already have the right of way. It's just the sidewalk's not built yet. So that was part of the development agreement. And we did specify that even though they don't own this piece in blue, they had to extend the sidewalk across pretty much all the way to their western boundary, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it's already taken care of.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we have 4 items on our consent agenda, our typical purchase agreements, deeds, easements. We also have the appointment of, I don't even know how to say that name.
I don't either. I'll find out for you though.
Okay, this really nice person to be on our Healthy West Valley. And the last one.
Leah.
Okay. And does the council have any questions on those? Okay, we'll move forward on those. And then does the council have any objection to adding the one resolution, the development agreement change amendment to the consent agenda for the regular meeting next week? Okay, seeing no objection, we'll move that to the consent. All right, we have some communication items. We'll turn the time over to Mr. Hill for our moderate income housing plan and our legislative update.
All right, Brandon Hill with the legal department. I really want to protest these engineering awards. I'm going to quit if you give them because these guys are going to be insufferable. It's just not acceptable. So we got a couple items here, and one of these was a question that we got last week about, there was a great question about how this might impact our moderate income housing plan. Councilman Whetstone, thank you for that. So essentially, let's see if I can do that correctly. There we go. So the general background, as you know, the moderate income housing plans are required by state law. They are changed every year in terms of what the requirements will be. And as we segue into our next topic, this year will be no exception. There will be additional changes required to that document. And so in reviewing our moderate income housing plan, there are 2 strategies where the housing authorities mentioned. So we have strategy C and O, and the reason they're called that is because that is the designation of the subsections in the state code. And so if it's subsection little 3-0, then, you know, you got that. So strategy C is to rehabilitate housing. And so we mentioned the housing authority there, but the housing authority isn't technically the entity that administers those grants as it is today. So those are sub-grants that are awarded by the city. And so the city will be retaining the grants division, and that might be reorganized a little bit, but the grants division is going to continue to do that. And so in terms of the moderate income housing plan, that element shouldn't change. How those awards go in the future is always subject to change. And so if we no longer receive those grant awards, then we would change that at that time. But as of now, that wouldn't change at all. Strategy O will change a little bit, but not this year, or it will change this year, but it will still be there this year. And so I'll explain what that is. And so we have Campbell Court and we have the Section 8 housing voucher program, and in strategy O this year in our reporting. So every year we have to report on how well we're doing with our moderate income housing plan. Our report will say that we have transferred these operations to Housing Connect, and we've worked with them to ensure a smooth transition for those residents, and just the same number of people are being served, and it's just going to be by a different entity through that. And so in 2026, we would either identify other things we're doing that fill within strategy O or add another strategy, or more likely we will have to submit an entirely different template because the housing plan will be changed completely next year. And so, but for our 2025 report, this information is going to be what's in there. Steve actually told me earlier this week he was working really hard on the moderate income housing plan. And I told him to go home for a month and see if we still had one. But that's the change that we'll see in 2025. So it will be a little bit of a change in the reporting. It's not going to be a substantive thing. And then 2026 we'll readdress strategy O. And so any questions about that before we move to the legislative portion of the discussion? All right. So these notes are fairly vague, and they're fairly vague because I did them last week. And so a lot has changed over the last week. And so we'll hit these general areas, and then we'll hit some interesting things that have happened in the last 24, 48 hours. So the housing bills are starting to take shape, and they're generally acceptable. And so these are, you're talking HB 360, HB 368, SB 162. Those are all pretty much consensus bills at this point. There's some technical fixes that are happening, but those are taking shape. And most of the more problematic housing legislation has kind of fallen by the wayside as the session goes. There's still an awful lot of time left, but that issue is generally moving in a good direction. Homelessness is a little bit more uncertain. So you've got two areas of homelessness legislation. So on one bucket, you've got everything but HB 465. And so these are going to be things like the Code Red counterpart to Code Blue, which isn't terribly problematic. There are bills to deal with camping on state property and that enforcement. There are bills that deal with how the mitigation fund is administered and how the state homeless office goes and what providers have to report. Those bills are all fine. There's some of those may impact us slightly, but not in any significant way. 465 is not resolved yet. Just as a refresher, this is the bill that is aimed directly at Salt Lake City. And the basic premise of this bill is that you have to enter into a contract with DPS, Salt Lake City, to have this rapid response team to come in and clean up homeless camps at your expense. And if you don't do that, we're going to take away your B&C road funds. And so the bill is drafted in such a way that other cities are sort of caught in the crossfire, even though we're not the intended target. And so the discussion about this bill is really fascinating because it potentially impacts West Valley, it potentially impacts Sandy, it potentially impacts St. George, and almost no one believes it. And so like the discussion is that focused on Salt Lake City that when you say like, well, so, but this says first class cities, and they say, right, but this is about Salt Lake. And you say, well, yeah, but the bill says first class cities. And literally the discussion is kind of like that at times. It's that focused on Salt Lake. That's good and bad. for us, to be totally candid. It's good in the sense that nobody's mad at how we're handling homelessness. Nobody is upset with our police department. No one thinks that we're doing a bad job. It's bad that the bill still applies to us, and it's bad. And the bill generally is pretty bad policy as well. B&C road funds don't have anything to do with homelessness. They just don't. So that bill is generally, the general trend on that bill is positive, but it's not resolved yet. And until it's resolved, it's not resolved. And so it's still going to be something we're going to work on. I am hopeful that a resolution will be reached on that about this time next week, but I can't promise that. The property tax bills are less in the air. The basic problem with property tax legislation is that, for one thing, everybody has a dog in that fight in one way or another. And second, it's pretty technically complicated. And so when you make changes to, for example, the residential exemption, that lowers some people's property taxes and automatically raises other people's property taxes to compensate. And so figuring out all of those moving pieces is really tough to do when you release a bill with 2 weeks to go in the session. And so bills like HB 511 don't look to be going anywhere. I think that is a discussion that's going to happen over interim. We always talk about property tax over interim. This is going to be no exception. So I think those issues are pretty much fine. This last bullet point pretty much covers the shape of the landscape in terms of the general trend at the legislature. Is to be really blunt about it, the legislature is really looking to assert its authority in essentially every area that you can imagine. And so there are at least 5 bills that take aim at the judiciary, which you may have seen in the news to some extent, increasing thresholds for judicial elections, changing standing requirements, all these kinds of things. Mostly lawyers care about that stuff, but it's one example of the way the legislature is asserting itself. You're also seeing this in terms of the executive branch as well, that in many cases, the legislature is trying to claw back some authority from state boards that they perceive that haven't been responsive to that mandate. And that's happening at the local level as well. And so I think that trend of reaching out and trying to micromanage is really the trend that looms over all of this. So for example, today there were 2 large bills released relating to the Fair Park and sports venue development, which again, primarily take aim at Salt Lake City and again, could potentially have impacts elsewhere. But in both of those cases, the state is intimately involved with making decisions about those projects. And so in maybe 10 years ago on projects like that, the state would provide a tool and have some feelings about what should happen, but would primarily leave the management to others. And that's not the trend right now. And so you're seeing that in a variety of areas, even down to local street management. So SB 195 took away Salt Lake's ability to put speed bumps in Sugar House. That bill will get fixed, but it passed the Senate that way. So
they have to go through another step more than we do.
Even more. Even more. So you guys think you have it bad. Like you're going to be talking about off-street parking and all of that stuff. And you guys really think it's tough here at West Valley. Well, now they got to go through UDOT to put in a speed bump in Sugar House. And you already can't get around over there. So, you know, it's fascinating. But that's the general trend. And so I think more than when you look at any specific policy area, whether it's housing, whether it's economic development, whether it's electrical infrastructure, whether it's roads, what you're seeing is this increased desire to control things. And that's a trend that unfortunately is across policy areas and doesn't show any sign of slowing down. Last thing is a bill that is not numbered. This is a bill that's been rumored for months that has been variously described as an authority to rule all authorities. One person unironically seemingly called it a Mordor bill today. They were very upset and then they admitted they hadn't seen it. So you tell me, that's how it is up there these days. But this bill essentially would potentially have an overarching state authority to govern things like MIDA, Point of the Mountain, Authority, Inland Port, things like that. The reason that's a potential concern for us is because there's been talk that this board might have land use authority. And the question is whether that would be an opt-in, like the current structure of the Inland Port, or whether that could be a top-down mandate. So here's the analogy I'll give you. And this is a joke that's going to be so funny in 2 days when the bill comes up. So funny. Okay, so I will give $50 to anybody who can name the 2 teams who played in the one NBA game I've been to in my life. Scott, your guess.
The Jazz?
Wrong. So back when the Hornets were the Hornets and weren't the Pelicans, they were in New Orleans, and Hurricane Katrina happened. So they came to Oklahoma City. And so I went to see the Hornets and the Washington Wizards, and David West hit a buzzer beater, and it was a lot of fun. The reason I mention it is because you have the Hornets, and the Hornets are really mean, but the Hornets cheerleaders were called the Honeybees. So they were really nice looking and pleasant and very happy. And so what we're going to find out is whether the Beehive has hornets or honeybees. And you're going to see why that's funny when the bill comes out.
Well, the bill is going to be called, or the department's going to be called.
The Beehive Development Corporation. So what's in the Beehive? Only the legislature knows. It's going to be really funny. But the reason that bills like that are pretty concerning is obviously we've had a whole interim year. We've had most of the legislative session that's gone by, and we still have not seen a bill. We've seen a lot of rumors. We've heard a lot of discussion. My general sense, if I had to put a bet on it, is that it's going to be an opt-in voluntary structure, which is fine. You can just choose to play or not, but that's not certain. And until we see the bill and until a bill is either passed or sunk, we won't know for sure. Yes, sir.
He pointed to you and looked at me.
So this morning I read that Salt Lake County is going to get rid of their justice court.
Yes.
So does that protect us now from any legislation taking away our justice court?
No, justice courts are going to be on the docket forever
Still?
until the end of time. Like
I
we
thought the
had.
county would be the only ones that would take it over from us.
So we had a justice court, and Eric here was actually on the task force to look at justice court reform. And literally the conclusion of the task force, boss, tell me if I get it wrong, was we have reached consensus on nothing. We don't know what to do, and we're giving up for now.
That's right.
Oh,
And so that was a real blue ribbon panel, boss. Good work. But when you say, will this protect us? The answer really is no, because the judiciary generally is being looked at really hard. And for instance, justice court judges would be included in the bill that bumps the threshold for judicial retention up from 50% to 67%. I'm not actually aware of any other jurisdiction that has a supermajority requirement for judicial retention. And so, yeah, that's going to be a live issue for a while. Yes, sir.
Where the LPC Thursday?
Yes.
Yes.
Noon.
Noon.
Yep. And
Line only.
yes, so it is online only. So you should have an invitation for that. There is no physical place you can go to, which we're all thankful for that. But the primary topics are going to be these land use bills. We've got the Fair Park bill, which is SB 336, 333 is the sports venue bill. And
one that hasn't been made public yet.
Also one that hasn't been made public yet. And that may not be the only one that hasn't been made public yet. And so, so if you're interested, tune in.
Transparency up there too.
Well, they have a really nice website. Like 2 minutes before it passes, it is absolutely on there.
Okay.
So it's not enough to be sitting there on the floor while the action's happening. You also have to be refreshing your phone. And so it's transparent in a way.
In a way. Okay.
Hey, any more questions? All right,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now turn the time over to Mr. Pastrick for our on-street parking discussion and code enforcement policy.
Well, I think this might be, of all my years of presenting, the the most recurring topic we've had on council agenda is parking. So you'll recall, and I won't go into all the backstory, but we talked about a possible program to determine when we might consider on-street parking restrictions. This is one of the areas we looked at. And just to briefly review what we had presented several months ago was you would measure essentially the total curb length along a street, which in this case represents the two red lines. So using this example in Treasure Isle, that's 1,550 feet. You'd subtract out the driveways, which of course you can't park in front of the driveways. So then that leaves you 980 feet. And then a parallel parking space by code takes 22 feet. So if you take that 980 feet, which is essentially the curb length minus the driveways, and you multiply that by 60%. So 60 was a kind of again, a number we used to say, well, we don't want to have cars parked on every square inch of curb. So we come up with this threshold to say if it's over 60, then at that point there's too much and it needs to be restricted. So again, if you take the 980 by 60%, that gives you 26 spaces when you divide that by the 22 feet per stall. Well, lo and behold, we had Mr. Steve Lehman, who lives not far from here, went out on 2 different evenings around 9 o'clock, counted cars, and guess what number he came up with? 26 stalls in both times. So it's essentially right on the threshold. Now, one alternative we discussed was that the code actually says that you can't park within 5 feet of the driveway, right? Well, these numbers don't factor that part in. So you could, if you did that, then that would drop that number by including that extra 5 feet on either side. That would drop that number to 22 stalls, which in that case, they would be over. So really just reporting back on the initial method we came up with, they were like right on the line of being, before we would impose restrictions. But again, if we looked at it through a slightly different lens and applied that extra 5 feet on either side of the driveway, then they would be over, and we could consider parking restrictions. So really just wondering what the council's pleasure is on this issue.
Any opinions?
And what restriction would you recommend?
So what we had suggested is essentially restricting parking to only one side of the street. So we would, and I don't know that there's any magic on which side. We would just say, you put up signs so you can't park on this side of the street.
So we can pick which side we want to shut down.
We could.
And there's space on one side for that many cars? No?
No, there wouldn't. And I think that'd be the point, is that, that it would essentially restrict how many cars can be parked on the street. The thought process at the time was, again, we trying to avoid a scenario where you have cars parked essentially like on both sides all the way down the street. But again, if the council desired, that is one option, would be to essentially limit the parking to just one side.
Lars, did you have, oh, sorry.
Sorry. go ahead.
Thought Lars had something.
No,
No? Okay.
I'm just nervous about doing this. Doesn't seem right to me.
I don't love restricting parking on one side and having on the other. In most cases, I think maybe in this case it would be good because the whole street is overparked. It's not just 1 or 2 or 3 houses. It's every house on the street has too many cars. So in this case, I think I would be okay with one side or the other, but y'all know my opinion.
You have driveways?
I would like to see if we can restrict on-street parking everywhere.
I do, but half of one street half of the
Half of the other.
The other side. The other
Yeah,
side.
north to
Then
south.
switch it next year.
So,
Even days
oh,
on one side of the street, and odd days on the other side of the street.
Sounds like a nightmare.
I was gonna say that's too much.
Kind of like they did in California when they had gas crisis.
Ah. Oh, yeah, for filling up at
Yeah.
a gas station.
You can go to a gas station if your license plate ends in an even number this today, you can go tomorrow for an odd number.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
I may. The main thing we,
Yeah.
sorry, Counselor, the main thing we wanted to come up with some methodology to be able to do something.
Yeah.
Which I think from staff perspective, we have it, we have a methodology there. As far as how we implement it, I mean, this is a way to be able to allow some parking. We all know we wanted to try something. My concern has always been that we need to make sure that it can be duplicatable. We can be consistent if we implement it throughout the city, and we, like I said, Steve's come up with this team's come up with a good, at least a methodology to try something. And so, I know we brought this before and we talked about restricting parking altogether. And then also this option. I don't know, our read with the council at that time, we didn't really know what the direction would be, but we would just wanted to present the fact that we have a methodology. We could go do this now. It's a matter of just putting up signs and this will be a test area. Again, I didn't want to do a test area without some type of, criteria in which we have. So at this point, we just kind of want to get some direction moving forward. If this is your thoughts on, get your thoughts on moving forward. Now, like I said, now we do have a criteria that can be applied to other parts of the city, but so this is kind of where we're sitting staff wise. And again, I don't know if we got a good read last time on what your consensus was, but hoping to get a little bit right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, before you try to shut it down, east side or west side, you gotta work with the residents in that area so they know which sides have more renters than, I'm talking about, right? So more cars there.
Yeah, I don't know that, from what I recall, I think we haven't looked very recently, but the vast majority of these are the at least based on the ownership or owner occupied. So again, that may have changed in the last little bit, but I don't recall there being very many rental licenses on this street.
The problem here, Steve, the primary, primary home, but they not live there. But in the loan or the title, they said the primary home, but they not live there. They rent it out for the whole house. I know one of them. Yeah, so we look in the papers, it's a primary home, but the person, the owner, not actually live there. Yeah, so that's my suggestion, try to find out which side have more cars, so you can set it up for that side.
So for me, I would like to include that whole subdivision. It looks like the homes in that cul-de-sac and the two just to the west of it were part of that development.
Right, so you have there's these two lots here. I believe there's actually a home on one of these lots now to the
Is there?
north.
Okay,
And then you have, right, it basically you can see beginning at this point and then to the east is where that
Yeah, 'cause
begins.
I can see those people taking some of the some of the parking stalls on that street. So did you look at issuing like one parking pass per home? So that you could have one visitor at a time that didn't fit in your driveway?
I know this is some time ago when we were talking about just parking restrictions in general, we talked about a possible permit system. But we, for this area specifically, we haven't looked at that. Where that tends to be a little more common is in an area where, for example, if you have a neighborhood next to, like, let's say a sports venue where you get a lot of people wanting to spill out, then that way you have a way of saying, okay, these people can be here, whereas these people that are, should be parking in a paid venue or can't be here.
Yeah, I just know for some of the calls I get, it's the neighbor taking up 3 other neighbors parking in front of their house. So they have extra kids or extra whatever. And I guess you could work with, I have 3 kids that park here all the time. You have none. Can I have your parking pass? Can I have your parking pass? And it could be a neighborhood work together type system. But that's the calls I've gotten is my neighbor's always parking in front of my house and then I don't have any parking for my guest.
So yeah, I know there are cities that do have a permit type system. It does involve more, there's more work involved in setting that up and administering the permitting system and then, checking. Whereas it's easier. It's just like if there's signs up saying you can't park on that side, it's just easier to say, yep, you're on this side, you get a ticket. But that one you have to more, make sure they have the permit and someone's got to actually issue the permits and track that.
And you actually have to walk it out to your car when you park there. Because we've had to do that. But so if we park on one side and there's 11 parking stall or areas and that's it. So one rental house could take all 11 and then the other single family homes would get nothing. I think that's my only concern. Is just being courteous to each other.
They're not doing that now.
I know.
Not being courteous now, so.
Well, that's why I think it'd be, if it's just one per house. Then you can only have 1 extra car on the road, 1 car on the road per house anytime. And the pass has to be in the car. So if parking rolls through there once a day or once a night,
But
I don't know.
You've got about 26 houses there.
Yeah, 19,
So you could have
Yeah, we
same
have
problem,
24.
26 houses on the road,
Yeah,
26 cars on the road. in the house.
well, there's 19 of that above, but I didn't know about those 2 lots, so maybe 20. And then 5 down in the cul-de-sac. I've counted it 4 times to make sure it even works in my brain. So I just thought the 19 with the 22 or the 20, the 22 when you took out the 10 on each side or 5 on each side is what I was trying to get close to. But if your goal is to get down to just 11, then one side or the other would help solve that. I just don't know if that's an achievable goal.
Ask a question since I don't have the context behind this.
Yes.
So why was this area chosen and is then the plan then to ramp it out to the rest of the city? So I don't know if you answer that, Steve.
So this particular neighborhood, we have had at least one resident that's been pretty vocal, came to council and expressed concern. And this is an area where you go out there and there are a lot of cars parked on the street, particularly in the evening. And so as to whether this would be rolled out in the rest of the city, I think this was meant to be sort of like the trial, if you will, to see if we were to do this here, how effective is it? And, do we have the resources to implement this in other places?
Just to add to that, this development was built with every house in the subdivision with a basement entrance. And I would say 80%, maybe up between 80 and 100% have basement apartments. They're renting them out. And some of them are like renting rooms. So you have multiple cars for the basement. And I'd encourage everybody to take a drive past there in the evening and see if that's what you want in West Valley, because I was gonna talk about this with when Barry was here, at Hamlet Homes. I went to their model home and drove through their subdivision. And every house has a basement entrance. Their model home has a basement apartment in it. So that's how they're marketing it. So I'm not excited about that. If he wants to open up the development agreement and make some changes, the first one I'll ask for is no basement entrances. So
And what is the address of this?
this is right by Costco, Treasure Isle, and
Sorry, Costco.
39th South, something like that.
That road
Side
is
215.
215.
Okay.
West of 215, yeah.
And Mayor, Councilor, if I can just add on to that for more context. So really, if we can walk it back even a little further, this has come about because of the boarding house issue, right? So we're in a sense, providing a solution on the parking side, but it really is to find a way to resolve some of the boarding house issues there. But it's not easy for us to go find or prove or find evidence for that. I will say personally, when, using this as a, sort of like swallowing the spider to catch the fly kind of thing. And so I wasn't really interested in going after the parking to figure out the boarding house issue. I think if I'm being honest, we need to, we talked about the task force. There's other things that we have in place that we really are looking into trying to beef up to go after that issue. But unless we do that, I mean, the alternative is nothing. And so this is an opportunity to try something. And again, I was personally opposed to just doing something like this and not having the criteria so that if residents came to me or came to us and said, why did you choose our neighborhood? Well, we have a criteria there. And one of the criteria is if you had one criterion is that you have somebody that's complaining, we would go and we'd do a study. We would look at it, and if it meets this criteria, then we would implement this. And so this gives us an opportunity to not, be in a position just pick and choose. There's actually a criteria in place. So that's why this particular area, and if somebody else from another area were to complain, we can duplicate it. We can be consistent about it. Even the process that Steve's done a good job of outlining a process to where we wouldn't be accused of picking and choosing if we did implement it this way.
I think one of the other reasons we chose this is they were the squeaky wheel and they kept squeaking. And so.
The other thing is, we all have boarding houses in our areas. I think we could all go by our, drive through our neighbors and think we identify one or two. But this is 20 that really feel like boarding houses. I drive there at night and it feels like an apartment complex driving through there in these brand new homes. And so that's the big thing is then you put 20 boarding houses up next to each other and it really is a problem. So I don't know how we fix it.
On the
And
map.
you're right,
Go ahead.
you're right. Parking is probably not, it's like swallowing the spider to catch the fly. You're right. It's going around the back end to try to fix this, but it doesn't seem like we can do a whole lot more as teeth to get at the problems.
What is up in the upper right-hand corner? As I'm
These are
looking at it.
apartments here that are accessed off
Are
of the
apartments?
38.
They are apartments,
Yes.
because they've got 13 of those 26 parking spaces already occupied. Just the cars I can count in the picture. But they come in from the other.
Correct. Yeah. So they don't have access to this street.
Okay. So that would actually be a little more access for the street parking.
Right.
In the subdivision.
I appreciate the desire to reduce boarding houses, but I don't think this is the right way to do it. I think that this will have unintended consequences. I think I have a house where we have 5 adults that live there. It's not a boarding house. They're my family, and we all have a car, and our driveway doesn't have enough space for that. And if I lived in this neighborhood, then we wouldn't have places to park our cars if we work late or arrive home late. And so what will we do? Well, we'll park in this other neighborhood.
To the west.
Yeah. And I'm looking at on Google Earth a newer picture of this neighborhood. And you can see the second house down on the right, the backyard is all cement.
The one by parking
Yeah.
commercial, yeah.
On Google Earth, there's cars parked back there.
Yeah.
2 houses down from that has some cars parked in the back. Those are probably boarding houses. And this is not gonna affect them because they have the parking in the back. So I think this could hurt people who are legitimate residents and not change the situation. If I want to have a boarding house there, I'll just put concrete in the backyard and create a driveway back there. I just, there's a lot of cars parked there. So telling them that now you can only have half the cars there, it's just gonna make people mad and not really fix the problem.
So you're saying it's not the right way to do this, so which way you think is the right way to do, Lux?
I don't have the solution, Tom, but I don't think that this is the way to do it.
I think probably one of the ways we could is require a building permit for a basement apartment.
We already do.
We do.
But do we, I guess, inspect to see where the building is going on and see if they have a permit?
So yes, we do require a permit. The challenge really is, I mean, I think about my own, I have a finished basement, right? And I have bedrooms downstairs. I don't have a boarding house. And, it could be inspected, and as soon as the inspector leaves, they could start renting out the bedrooms and we'd have no idea because everything checked out in the inspection. I mean, that's essentially what's happening is people are getting, permits, and there are times we find issues, they're corrected, but then once they're corrected, the next day they could start renting it by the room, and unless they're advertising it, we won't know. So that's where the difficulty comes in.
The problem we have in this street, with this street is every single home is a boarding home. That's a problem. Yeah. And that's why we have so many cars. And it's sad to see the resident, they only have the family there and they're not a boarding home. It's sad to see those people live in that street.
So can we restrict walkout basements in our development agreements on new builds? That we don't have those anymore?
We have been doing that on recent ones.
Yeah, so it's just the ones that we didn't foresee this being a problem, being the problem.
I think I would support parking on the side only. That seems easier, not easier, but able to enforce just because it's clearly you're parking in front of the sign. We have that on Man Way right now. We get, do you see that? Those folks that live there, do we get complaints from them that we have no parking in front of their home? I know those are duplexes, so it's a little bit different, but.
I'm not sure. I personally have not had complaints, but I'm not sure if the city has received complaints there or not.
And it's mostly double homes down there too.
Like twin homes. Yeah.
Not just.
When was that rule put in place? Does anyone know?
For man.
For Manway?
A long time ago.
And was it because of the street width?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very narrow
Pretty
street. I
narrow
use it when I take my grandkids to elementary. Use it to come back around to 40th.
And anyone who moves in there knows that's gonna be the situation, right?
And that's probably a public
So
safety.
it's one thing to move into a place that has that restriction. It's another thing to buy a home where you don't have that restriction and then take that away from them.
So are these homes 3-car garages?
Yes, most, yeah, I think the majority of them have 3-car garages.
So truly, 6 cars can fit off the street.
Right.
So even Lars's situation would be solved there because you have 6 spots for cars, 3 in the garage, 3 in the driveway.
Put cars in the garage.
Yes, or you don't live in my house. I think there's a few of us that have very strict rules about that one. So with having 3-car garages and larger driveways, I probably wouldn't be as adverse to parking on one side. And see if it helps them at all. But if we have a better way to tackle boarding houses before that, or the task force or something,
So we put it in for 6-8 months and see what effect it has.
as a pilot program.
Yeah.
Well, if our goal is to eliminate boarding houses, the best way to figure out if it works is to count how many are boarding houses now. Put this in place and count how many are not in a year. I don't know.
How do we?
So how do you
we
do
can't
that?
even go in and find out if they're boarding houses, you know?
You only have the stories that say this many are.
Well,
We don't know for a fact.
We don't know for a fact.
Yeah.
You know,
It's not a census year.
my honest opinion on this, I mean, it's been, I don't think it will solve the problem. I mean, we can do nothing and we can try. And that's where I'm at is, you know, we get calls, to one of our residents here. In fact, it just reminded me that part of our conversation with a resident here, this really got my mind going on this. Like, I really was not interested in doing this just because of the council member, Northfeld's, thoughts. I feel the same way. And then it was brought up about how we do studies for speed bumps and how we look and we have a criteria, which I thought was a great idea. We came back and talked to Steve about it. Just getting something consistent. But the whole premise for me is, I mean, we don't know if we don't try. I mean, and so I'm pretty skeptical about whether or not this will work as far as boarding houses. Would it clear the road for cars? I mean, obviously, if we're gonna enforce it. But for boarding houses, in this neighborhood, it might work too, and in others, it won't. You'll probably have the majority of in some places, if we just did it that way, you'd have people show up to city council meeting complaining about it. And so that's why we have in this process residents coming in as the main impetus for us trying this. We have residents submitting this complaint and looking for a study just like we would do for the speed bumps, right? They come in, they initiate that complaint, we go through, and then at the back end, we have the hearing, right? Steve, where residents from the street can come and voice their concerns, just how we do with the other process. Again, that's duplicatable. I don't think we'll have the same result. I think just for me going there, talking to residents, I don't know if we'll have that complaint from all of the residents there. And if there are a bunch of boarding houses there, like we think there are, I doubt those owners of those homes will come in and say, I need more parking for my boarding houses. So we probably won't find the same complaints as if we did this in a different neighborhood. For example, the neighborhood I live in right now, I don't think we would get away with that. Because we have a lot of cars parking on my street, but I think you'll have a lot of residents come in and complain, including myself. Because I also have adult children that come home from college and park, and high school kids as well. But at least this is one tool. Like I said, I don't think it's going to resolve the issue, not even close. but it's the only two we got right now. The only thing we have to try.
I think the other thing is we're gonna see more and more of this, I mean, everywhere. My neighborhood, people are renting rooms, excess cars on the street. So that's one thing, is maybe this is the test and we can start to do something. The other thing is, how do we enforce this? Because I have neighbors that park in my cul-de-sac, they got ticketed, they were good for a few minutes and, then they're right back at it. So that's another concern. So how are we gonna enforce this? But
It looks to me like the street to the west is more narrow than this street.
Slightly.
And if we take away half the parking spaces over there, people will park over there and it'll be worse for them
So,
than it is right now for these people.
yeah, so the road that we're referring to, it's 29 feet of pavement, which is our current standard. The road to the west would have been built under the county, and that's 25 feet of pavement, so it is somewhat narrower.
Yeah, I think this will cause more problems and will not fix what we hope it will.
We don't know yet, but. Yeah. Maybe they can, renters, they can, feel bad, they're gonna move somewhere else. So we don't know yet, we haven't done anything yet, that we're just assuming it.
So I guess we're the question, are there 4 of you that would like to move this forward as a test?
I'm supporting that.
That's 3. I'm trying to decide.
And just, for Cindy, my thought was it would be no overnight parking. So you can still park on the street, but from midnight to 5 in the morning, you can park on the street. So it'd be no overnight parking on the street. With the hopes that it would limit those boarding houses because they don't have parking. So
So you're saying no overnight parking at all?
Instead of this idea,
that was my original thought. No overnight parking at all.
so then when patrol's bored, they can just go out and give parking tickets to anybody on the street.
From midnight to 5 in the morning. Or people are gonna have to self-contain their parking.
Go in the driveway and in the garage.
Add some pavement on your, on your property.
To the side of the garage.
I have 5 kids, we've got 5 cars. And when the others come home. Sometimes they park on the street, but we would have to just self-contain.
Yeah, we've been blessed. Our house has a huge garage or driveway.
so I know there's restrictions on, your landscaping in the front. Is there anything on the back? Someone can go in and pave their whole backyard?
We
Concrete
have
it.
no restrictions on how much can be done in the back.
So I don't know that that's gonna eliminate the boarding house. They'll just do that.
That's what.
We already
That's what
That's what they've already done, yeah.
And more of them will do that.
So 3 of
They
them
can, yeah.
are pretty self-contained themselves. And I think the neighborhood's complaint, the parking on the street or the boarding houses?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we're trying to solve 2 things
With one
with one,
line.
yeah.
But one, the boarding houses, we really don't have any tools. We can have a task force, but threatening letters and door hangers,
And they have to let you in the house to inspect it.
if they're gonna do that.
Yeah, you don't have-
So we don't seem to have a good enforcement ability for boarding houses. And so then we have to tackle what we can, and that's parking.
And I've heard, and you can add on, Steve, I've heard there's been some good examples when working together as a task force, our city staff has come together and there's some good good stories about being able to tackle some of these, but a lot of effort, basically a full-on task force for one home. So I've heard there were some good positive outcomes from that, and that's why we even talked about a task force. And so the bandwidth isn't there yet to go throughout the whole city. But it took a lot of work, right, for one home.
It's typically not just one department. It's involving, it's looking at licensing, it's looking at permits, it's
Investigating all of that,
code violations,
legal.
right? It's looking at all those to see if there's an angle that we can pursue.
Just, and Steve probably knows this, but just looking at the real estate market now, in West Valley, you can see houses that will sell for market, not just fixer uppers, but houses that will sell for market with an unfinished basement. They will finish the basement, put in a basement entrance and sell it for $200,000 more. So then we have basically a boarding house. And it takes away these houses because they buy them like that, takes them away from
Just normal families.
normal families that would like to buy a house in West Valley, so.
So can we outlaw basement entrances? A resolution from this point on, no more new ones?
So
I mean-
could we, I mean, the state says we have to allow ADUs, but could we say no permits for basement entrances from now on?
That's something we can research, but so a number of years ago, the state put in restrictions on, like, for example, we can't require a house to be over 1,000 square feet. And they also put in some other restrictions on what cities can do. We'll need to go back and review that and see if prohibiting basement entrances is covered in that legislation. So maybe we can come back and do some more research, come back with that and answer.
But we can definitely put it in our development agreements.
Right, that's something we can negotiate.
The other issue is that the trend throughout the country is going the opposite direction, right? We know with our own legislature, but throughout the country, requiring ADUs and, just because of the housing. I mean, a lot of these walkout basements, I'm currently building a home now with a walkout basement. And I'm thinking about my parents have passed, but I'm thinking about my wife's parents, right? And so there's multi-generational homes, kids that come home because they can't afford a house. And so the basement, so they're not necessarily boarding houses, but the trend, and Steve could probably attest to this, the conferences you go to, it's more on property because of where the housing trend is going. And so that's another issue with the boarding houses, because there is a need for multi-generational housing in some cases, but you don't know where to draw the line there.
And I think I agree. It's just so hard to figure out, like, I would be okay to issue a permit for a homeowner that lives there and wants, have basement access for kids that live in their basement or parents. Mother-in-law apartment, but how do you differentiate that from the guy that's flipping a house and putting it in just so he can increase the sales price by 200,000 so he can get his.
Well, here's another interesting fact that Steve pointed out. That owner occupancy hasn't changed, right, over time. So these are homeowners that are doing this, and maybe in this neighborhood the owner isn't there, but according to the stats we have, right, Steve, that you presented,
Right. At least the title shows them as the tax notice is being sent to the home.
the tax notice is getting sent to the homeowner at the address of the house.
But they may not be there.
And
We don't know.
it could be. But even anecdotally, you're seeing a lot of homeowners just trying to generate wealth, right? And that's being encouraged throughout that's the trend, the strong towns, the trend is, you want to generate wealth, you fix up your apartment, you rent it out. And currently the code doesn't disallow that, right?
Well, when the state required us to allow ADUs or accessory dwelling units, they did crack the door and say, okay, cities can restrict those for a certain percentage of your residential zoning. So what we did is we said we would allow them west of 40th, but not east of 40th. And so, so in those cases, someone can still finish their basement. It just can't be like a separate unit, which again, that gets to be really tricky because someone can, finish their basement, have a walkout and say it's not a separate apartment, but as soon as we inspect it, it's all you have to do is, put a door at the bottom of the stairs, lock it, and there you go, right? It's just really difficult to enforce.
And I don't like saying no basement, no outside entrances going forward. And I mean, in my neighborhood, I don't know how many people have outside entrances and their children are living in it or their relatives or someone. It's not intended to be a boarding house. It's intended to provide a place for someone to live. It's more affordable. So, I mean, my children took advantage of that and moved in someone's basement. They didn't move in mine because I don't have an outside entrance. But yeah, I think that's a challenge. Some don't intend it to be a boarding house. They just intend it to be a place to rent out.
So I would say let's go ahead with the test project. And this one, because we had 3 for sure. I'll go along with that. So there's 4 of us. And give it a 6 month or a year review.
Let's put till the end of the year.
Okay, to the end of this year. Then review it.
And if we screwed up and there's major issues, we can look at it again.
Sooner,
Listen to learn. That's no
We
problem.
gotta try something.
but at the most, just till the end of the year.
So just to clarify then, so I make sure I get this right. So we did decide on one side, right? Not, and so it would be on one side just at night or all the time?
Well, I think you can do all the time for this.
Okay.
But just at night was, we can get larger, that's what I was saying, for larger areas in the city.
And then just again to clarify, so I know the drawing we just showed just north-south street, but we would basically pick up from this entrance here all the way down to here, right? Basically within that entire subdivision. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
All right, and then is code enforcement another subject?
It is, yes. Maybe just one last question on this. Is there a preference on one side or the other? I personally don't have a preference. I don't know if the council has a preference.
I think you have more space.
So if you're going from there to there, you probably want to have parking in the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, so I think you'd have to go the right-hand side,
West
So
side.
do the east
so
side,
East side.
south and east,
yeah, south and east, okay.
so they can park in front of their own house in this cul-de-sac.
Okay.
Because otherwise the guy in the circle would have no place to park. If it's the west side.
We have our heading.
Okay,
Well, the west side has one more area too.
So if, Mr. P, if you wanted to provide any intro to this or if you want me to jump in.
Maybe I'll provide a little intro as you're getting ready, Steve. So as we have a new chief code enforcement officer, you kind of want to really, come out with a good plan all the way around. Tomas brought up some really great ideas that he's moving forward on. This is something that I've asked Steve to kind of take a look at, to make sure that they have their tools as they go out. And there's been some confusion, I think, in the past. And I want to make sure they have some clear marching orders. And so that Tomas can start his new job as a chief code enforcement officer, be able to clarify and to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So just coming in, I've noticed that there's been policy, so that we've been direction that's been given to our code enforcement officers that don't necessarily match the code, or the code hasn't been amended to match it. And so that's Steve to kind of put together what he's seen where, and work with Tumai, where we have certain policies and then the discrepancies on where the code is. And so for me today, it's really not even to go one way or another, but to just make sure if we want to change the policy, then we need to change the code. If we want to, if we like the way the code is, then we should drop the policy. And then Steve will explain that, and you'll see that more apparent as he goes through his presentation. But I mean, there's not a whole lot as we've gone through it, but just some things that have come down in the past. I know Tumai can attest to that. Again, we've started off with different policies that we've told our code enforcement officers to apply, but we haven't amended the code. And so I think it's for everybody involved, both from the council administration, especially for our code enforcement officers, to have those line up and match, regardless of the direction we go through, to have that match. We can point to the code. You know, if residents have complaints with the code, it's not, well, administration or council wants it this way. We just point to the code. This is what the code is. And so that keeps our code enforcement officers, being able to do their job more effectively that way. And so I appreciate Steve and his team going through this with Tumai and others. So
Thank
I'll
you.
just let you
Thank
go,
you.
Steve.
So we, again, as Mr. Peters said, we tried to look at, again, the common things that code enforcement deals with and see where there's a difference between what our policy has been and what the code says. So starting with inoperable vehicles. So you'll see a common thread here is the issue of whether we enforce in the backyard. So that's certainly an issue here, right? Where the code currently does not limit our ability to enforce inoperable vehicles in the backyard, but the policy has been we don't enforce inoperable vehicles in the backyard. The other discrepancy here is that the code is more broad in what is considered an inoperable vehicle. So for example, an unlicensed or unregistered vehicle is considered inoperable, but the policy has been we don't care about whether it's licensed or registered. There's also when you read the definition of an inoperable vehicle, it's pretty expansive, where technically a vehicle could be, appear to be operable, but still be deemed an inoperable vehicle. So really those are the two discrepancies in this instance is, whether we enforce in the backyard, which, the policy is no, but the code doesn't restrict that. And then the code is more expansive or it includes more vehicles as inoperable than our policy does. On landscaping, this is probably where there's the biggest, discrepancy between the code and policy. So our policy has been that we're only enforcing if, you have grass or weeds that are taller than 6 inches in the front yard. So here again, the 6-inch rule in the code applies, backyard, front yard, doesn't matter. But then the code also actually specifies what our kind of minimum standard is for landscaping. And this is residential. So in residential, it talks about, 30% live plant material and not having weeds. And so here again, the discrepancy being is that the code is much more prescriptive about what should be in a front yard versus what we're actually enforcing. On these other items, like outside storage, surfacing, and fencing, really the only discrepancy here is, again, just the front yard versus the entire yard. So I've included in here, the typical things or the things that are addressed. So for example, on outside storage, it's like household items, materials, things that are stored outside. With surfacing, the code says vehicles have to be on an approved surface. So that would be like concrete or asphalt, or in some cases, the code allows gravel. And then with fencing, we have regulations on like what materials are acceptable, how tall it can be. It has to be maintained to a certain specification. So again, these right now, if there's a violation in the backyard, we're doing that by policy, whereas the code would allow us to do that. Another discrepancy we've seen is that the policy has been, we're only using administrative citations, which are essentially like a ticket for parking violations. So for example, if someone's parking in their grass, we would do an administrative citation. But the code allows us to do those for pretty much anything as a tool, right? As one enforcement tool. Now we do have courtesy notices, notice of violation. But right now the code would allow us to use what we call admin sites for much anything if it was deemed the best approach. Finally, this isn't really a discrepancy, but more just a explanation when it comes to backyards. So if the council was comfortable sort of lifting that policy and saying we're okay to enforce in backyards, here's kind of the rule on that. So we actually don't need a warrant to do enforcement in the backyard if, as it's stated here, when an officer can observe an otherwise protected area from a location they can lawfully occupy. So I've given 3 examples. So one is if you have a house where the yard's not fenced, right, and you're on the street and you can clearly see into the backyard that they've got, 3-foot tall weeds and an inoperable vehicle, that would be permissible to enforce because we can see it, right? Another would be, and we do get this, where a neighbor may complain and say, hey, I'm okay to have you come into on my deck and you can see it from my deck, and they give permission for that. Another that our building inspectors uses with Google Earth imagery, we'll often see, you can do kind of like, look at images from say 5 years ago and then a current one and say, wait, we had this structure show up and there's no permit, right? So we use that oftentimes to see work that's, or pursue work that's done without permits. So those are just some examples of how we could use, again, just ways of observing to enforce in backyards if that's the council's desire. So those are, again, high level, the discrepancies we see between policy that's been in place and what's in the code.
So are you looking for direction of what we would like enforced? What would you like direction up with this?
Yeah, I think for me, Mayor, is to just align either the policy with the code or the code with the policy. So I have a little bit of context of why we went into some of this, why some of the policy, different reasons, but for me right now, it's just, I just want them to match. So, when I puts our code enforcement officers in a tough situation when they go and they enforce something or don't enforce something, residents know what the code is and it doesn't match. And so the only thing they could say is this is what we've been told, right? Because that's the truth. That's what they've been told to do. I think if the residents really wanted to push back on some of these, the fact that it's not in the code and the policy's not written. So not only it's not in code, but I don't think some of these policies are even written anywhere. It's just, this is direction that came and we haven't codified it in any way, shape or form. So just with each one of those, like just take for example, enforcement in backyards. I heard coming in that we don't enforce in the backyards. That was policy. Kind of puts them in a tough situation when residents who have been the recipient of some enforcement in their backyards and they point something out, code enforcement officer goes over, said, well, we don't enforce that anymore. They don't know why, they don't, and the code enforcement officer just says, I've been told, this is what I've been told. It'd be a lot more effective to say, well, our code does not allow us to enforce in the backyards, right? If we can point residents back to the code. And of course, the code can be amended. So I just like to go through that process instead of changing policy without having it codified. So from here on out, if council feels, we want to go back to enforcing or changes, you change your mind, we just change the code. And we can always point residents back to the code and our code enforcement officers won't have to get caught in between trying to reconcile between policy and the code.
Okay, so I don't think we can do it in 10 minutes. Like it's
Yeah,
on
I
the
don't think
agenda.
so either.
So I'm wondering if we should take one of our off weeks and start at 4:30 or 5 o'clock and just take a couple hours, because I know in the past it hasn't been a short conversation on code enforcement. They've always been pretty intense and long meetings.
Anyway,
Yeah, so if we could get one of our off weeks and just focus on this for one meeting, I think that would help a lot. Does anybody have objection to that?
Good idea.
Let's try and schedule that.
I think right now, we probably ought to look at aligning to the code. And then if that doesn't align with what we've been doing, then we can look at the changes we need.
In the
to
code,
make.
yeah.
Tweak the code.
Right, you know, outside storage always gets to me. Cause I have a front yard pond. And 4 or 5 years ago, my son decided we were gonna change the pond, so we pulled all the gravel out of it, but gravel's expensive, so we put it all in a bucket.
Bucket, yeah.
We put the bucket beside the pond. We didn't get around to it, didn't get around to it. Then they came out and said I had outside storage. And I said, what? Well, there's this bucket here. It's rocks. You know, rocks belong outside. I removed them anyway, but
Well, and we had a neighbor that literally unloaded their mulch in their carport. It was there for 3 hours before they were gonna install it, and they got a ticket in that much time. So everything's a little subjective, but we do need to have exact code and
Policy that
follow it.
matches.
Yeah, policy that matches it.
And maybe when we do, we can have some time for Tumai and maybe we can
Yeah.
talk to come and present on some of principles that we really wanna and moving forward and even get back to, sometimes we confuse, more engagement and more touches with the residents as heavy-handed. And I don't think that's the same thing. I think more engagement, more touches, and you don't have to be heavy-handed. You can, really get to know residents more, and really, it may even take more work than, but that's some of the things we kind of want to talk about too, as we, just our policy, administrative policies moving forward on how we're gonna handle, like I said, Tumai's come up with some great ideas on how we can move forward and really perpetuate that philosophy. But that might be a good time for us to talk about
Yeah.
that and others.
Well, and I think with their input, they see things that we don't see. That they, our retreat was, beautification, respect, all these different things. So I think if we have their insight of this would really help, or this is a waste of time. Yeah, I think having that insight would be great too. So
Great.
more staff, the better.
Steve, is that all you have right here, or?
Yes, sir.
So we can look through, these are the major ones.
Correct.
Then in our meeting, we can nail that. And it might take two, one to get it all presented to us, and then another one to actually
talk about
conquer it, and make the changes. Okay.
Great.
I'll make good use of those off weeks. Thank you. All right, the calendar, anyone have any issues with that or questions?
Is anyone going to the ribbon cutting for Gerald, right?
I am. Yeah, I won't be there in the entire time. I'm hoping they take care of the, at the very first. But you're quite involved with their committee, correct? So do you want to speak at that instead of me, or do you want to speak at that as well?
Either way, I'm fine.
Okay.
I can speak.
We'll talk about that offline then. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Okay, any potential future agenda items? Any council reports? So we. No, okay. We do have need for a closed session. If someone would like to make a motion for disposition of real property and deployment of security.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have motion and a second, Ms. Kamic for a roll call.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Whitstone, Councilmember Harmon,
Yes.
Councilmember Hune,
Yes.
Councilmember Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Nordfelt,
Yes.
and Mayor Ling.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we'll give a few minutes for those who don't need to stay to clear the room. And then we will end this meeting at the end of that closed session with no other business being